Lewis Hamilton's first pole for Ferrari kicked off a fascinating first sprint weekend of 2025, and from that shock qualifying upset to technical intrigue and a new lap record, here's what we've learned already from the Chinese Grand Prix. From the very start of Friday, Hamilton looked a lot more comfortable in his Ferrari after a difficult debut weekend in Australia. But a sprint race pole position was still a surprise, as was his healthy margin over teammate Charles Leclerc pretty much all through sprint qualifying. Hamilton just edged out Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri to score his first Ferrari pole, such that it is, and he won't care that McLaren's Lando Norris should have closed out a faster lap, because Norris didn't. The erratic nature of this Ferrari was evident in qualifying, as both Hamilton and Leclerc battled big rear snaps in slow speed corners. At its best, the SF25 looks mighty, but it can fall off just as quickly, as it did in the second part of qualifying when both drivers got caught out on their first runs. Hamilton always looked the most likely to pull it together though. He was confident in the car all day, and in qualifying was visibly more proactive on corner entry than Leclerc, attacking the braking zones and hustling the car all the time. That was perhaps a result of Hamilton's claim that he would set up the car a little differently this weekend. He'd followed Ferrari's lead in Australia, as Hamilton admits he's been chasing knowledge of what to change on the car. But he said he wanted to start steering things more in China, and whether that's actually the case or not, on track there's been a clear step from Melbourne for both driver and team that almost certainly comes down to getting the car in a better window to get the most out of its tyres. Australia winner Norris underachieved in qualifying for the China sprint, locking up into the hairpin to miss out on what looked like a likely pole. He and Oscar Piastri both looked ragged through the day, but also blindingly quick when they got it right. This is perhaps a further manifestation of the peaky McLaren's trait to bite back. Right at the start of testing, this was hinted at as a potential McLaren weakness. A comparison of each team's best sector in Shanghai sprint qualifying is an imperfect analysis, but shows how clear McLaren is when it comes together, almost 3/10 from Ferrari and Red Bull. That hints McLaren's true potential advantage is about the same as it was in Melbourne, but after mistakes on their first runs in Q3 last week, both McLaren drivers have struggled to hook it up in sprint qualifying in China. Norris said he made too many mistakes in a car that was too difficult to drive. Both drivers tried something different for the final qualifying runs, opting to do 2 push laps with a cooldown in between. That didn't pay off, with the other teams instead rewarded for being fueled slightly lighter and going for broke over a single lap. Piastri felt McLaren had done well trying to tame the car for qualifying. Still, it seems vulnerable this weekend, which has nothing to do with flexi wings and the FIA's short notice rule change, because McLaren says it hasn't changed anything to comply with that, and everything to do with the kind of car McLaren has developed. The front row of the grid for the sprint is a tantalising prospect, with old rivals Hamilton and Verstappen alongside each other. That gives the sprint a bit of a throwback feel, especially as McLaren has started 2025 as the team to beat. In reality, that is still the case in China, and not just over one lap. The nature of a sprint weekend means we are very light on representative data after just one practice session. But what little running was achieved in the condensed FP1 points to a McLaren edge once again, with a repeat from Melbourne of how its advantage balloons in the final sector due to superior tyre temperature control. All things being equal, McLaren should still be the favourite for the sprint, with Piastri obviously in a better position than Norris. Ferrari didn't do a long run in FP1, not that any team did a real one, so it's hard to judge the gap, but Red Bull looked quite a way off, so Piastri should fancy his chances of picking off Verstappen and Hamilton even in the sprint. And Mercedes wasn't in the picture at all at the end of qualifying, as though the car seems more user-friendly, it's simply lacking a bit of pace on low fuel and soft tyres. One new variable in the mix is this is a fully resurfaced Shanghai circuit, helping Hamilton set a new lap record in qualifying. The new surface is smoother, which reduces the setup trade-off that previously existed in terms of ride quality, and there's added grip. This could impact the race, as Shanghai is a front-limited track, which means the front axle is worked harder, and if the cars are being pushed even more, that could take more out of the front left than before. After a nightmare Red Bull debut in Melbourne, Liam Lawson's having an even worse time of it on paper in China, where he's qualified slowest of all for the sprint race after a mistake on his second run. Here's Ed Straw's verdict after watching Lawson from trackside in both Friday sessions.
Watching practice trackside up at turn 3, it was clear that Liam Lawson was going to have a very difficult weekend. On his first flying lap, he carried tremendous speed into turn 3, which looked great for a moment, and then he ran wide at the exit. That was the consequence of trying to feed the power in when he was under-rotated, and it just spat him wide, and he was much more conservative thereafter. The bottom line is you can't shortcut the learning process, doubly so when up against a driver like Max Verstappen. He had problems in Bahrain testing, he lost FP3 in Melbourne, he's trying to play catch-up lap on a sprint weekend. So I went down to the same spot in sprint qualifying, expecting something like what happened, which was elimination in SQ1, slowest of all. Actually, his first lap was decent enough. It was 0.4 off Verstappen. He was under-rotated in turn 3 again, the same problem to a much smaller degree. Didn't get the power down on the exit, and then after cooling off his tyres, he didn't do it enough. He was all right through turn 3 next time round, then a wide moment between 9 and 10 pretty much ruined his lap, and out he goes. Just very, very, very hard task for Liam Lawson. He's trying to learn faster than ideally he would, and this is the consequence on a sprint weekend.
Alpine's the first team to admit that it's had to make changes to its rear wing following F1's latest mini DRS clampdown, and proceeded to have a terrible day on track. The FIA's decision to introduce tougher rear wing flexibility checks for this event was prompted by suspicions that 4 teams may have been pushing the limits of the rules too much: McLaren, Ferrari, Alpine and Haas. While the top teams say nothing has changed for China, Haas implied on Thursday it was likely to need to make setup changes to its wing to comply with the new restrictions, but Alpine went even further and admitted it has had to work on its design this week to make modifications. It wouldn't elaborate on how significant the changes are, but said staff at its Enstone factory had worked hard to get everything sorted in time. While correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation, it's hard not to assume that Alpine's immediately been stung by the change after both drivers were eliminated in the first part of sprint qualifying. The margins are tight in the midfield, so if Alpine has now sacrificed a little straight line speed, and we know it doesn't think its engine is very good, that could be making a difference here with the long back straight. But so far the team sought to play that down, blaming the double sprint quali Q1 exit on traffic at the start of both drivers' laps. There are now 2 competitive qualifying sessions in the books for 2025, and 2 proven one-lap aces are lagging behind their new teammates. Carlos Sainz continues to lack something against Alex Albon at Williams, which is still in a very tight contest with Racing Bulls to be best of the rest at the start of the year. While Albon starts the sprint race in the top 10 and with a sniff of a point 1 place behind Yuki Tsunoda, Sainz was a fairly surprising elimination in the second segment. He's still struggling with getting the most out of the soft tyres in the Williams and tends to be much happier on harder compounds. He reckons it's a combination of 3 things. His default style is still more tuned to his Ferrari days, he isn't quite on top of all the setup tools he now has at his disposal, and he's just missing a bit of feel on tyre preparation and how each compound reacts. Another driver who seems to be in a similar position is Nico Hülkenberg. A renowned qualifying specialist, Hülkenberg has now been beaten in a normal qualifying session and a sprint qualifying session by rookie teammate Gabriel Bortoleto. The 2025 Haas has a flaw so severe, the team thought something had to be broken at first in Australia. But a perfectly reasonable start in China means there's actually a glimmer of hope here for a team that seemed to be facing a real car crisis. Haas discovered a chronic problem in high-speed corners in Melbourne with poor ride quality and aerodynamic inconsistency that left it the slowest on the grid by a long way. It's going to take several races before Haas can bring real fixes for that, and in the meantime, it has to make the most of what it's got. Opening practice in China was used as a big test session, with Haas trialling different setups across both cars to work out how to best mitigate its issues here. And it's already looking a bit better, mainly because the track lacks the kind of fast direction changes that really exposed the car in Melbourne, where Haas was pretty much losing 0.4 in a single corner. Though Esteban Ocon was eliminated in the first segment of qualifying with some suspected floor damage, Ollie Bearman will start the China sprint race from 12th on the grid. That means Haas looks like it might even be in the mix for points this weekend, just a few days after staring down the barrel of disaster.